Hello and welcome to this ArcSight logger tutorial and demonstration. Today's session we're going to be talking about custom fields and how they can be used in searching and reporting effectively. You may remember that the ArcSight logger schema is a subset of the SEF schema, whereas logger holds many but not all the SEF fields from the SEF schema by default. If you've ever taken a look at the actual schema itself, you'll see that not everything is included from the SEF schema. So if we jump into our logger here and go to search indexes, you'll see that there is a number of fields that are indexed, but there's plenty of others that are not indexed. And at the same time, this is also, again, a subset of all of the available SEF field. So you'll notice here on the search index page we have these two available tabs: Indexable Fields. So in other words, these are fields that are within the logger/SEF schema but not actually being indexed right now. So any sort of searching and reporting and so forth on these fields will be very slow. Now we deliberately keep a lot of these out of the index. Obviously indexing takes processing, but at the same time these particular fields aren't seen to be as the most important for indexing and reporting by our customers. But below that you'll see the indexed fields, and they are the fields that we index by default. And you have the ability to add more fields to the indexable fields array. This becomes important when we're dealing with our own custom fields. Now, custom fields are something that we want to add to the logger schema itself. We don't want it to be a random field that turns up in one of our searches and is not available to reports. We want it to be part of the logger schema and something that we might want to actually index going forward. This might be something like the last four digits of a credit card. It might be a MAC address of some description. It might be a text value that you pull from your own customized log that you could put into a device custom string or number field from the SEF schema, but many of our customers want to have far greater control. So they want to be able to literally extend the schema that's available to them in terms of database fields for their own purpose. And so this is why we have this function called custom fields within logger. Now by default you'll see no custom fields. We want to add our own, and we'll do that very shortly. The way in which we perform this task is to go into what's called maintenance mode. Maintenance mode is used for things like volume increase and decrease, storage groups, storage volumes, and as well as creating custom fields. So essentially extending the database and the available database fields within logger. So this is something that you would not do on a production system during the day when things need to keep running. This is an out of operation type of task. So firstly what we'll do is we'll go into maintenance mode and we'll actually add a new field, and this will become important later on during the demonstration. So we'll go into maintenance operations, and you'll see here a list of operations that we can perform. We're actually interested in adding fields. Of course, as I mentioned before, we can do data defragmentation, volume size increase, deal with storage groups and so forth. And in this case, we want to add fields. So we'll click on Add Fields, enter the maintenance mode, and this takes several minutes to go into maintenance mode. So we'll come back when this is ready. Now that we're in maintenance mode and we've gone to our custom field section, we can start adding a new custom field. So firstly, up the top here, you'll find the new custom fields that we're going to create. Obviously none at this stage. And then in the second section here, this is where we create our additional fields. Now, what's important here is additional data field name should be ticked usually, because we're going to include that field value information in our SEF event via what's called an additional data field. Additional data fields are a way for ArcSight to push extra field and event information through within a SEF event. So if we're effectively extending the schema or the SEF schema to suit ourselves. And obviously every customer and every user and organization is going to be different in what they need. So this allows us to go beyond that 400 odd fields within the SEF schema to create anything we really want to. And the clicking of this actual checkbox is important because it becomes important in the final field name. We'll see that in a second. So the display name, we're going to give it a name of DH name, for example. So device host name for short. I have the choice of a double, a big int, date, timestamp, and text. We're going to make ours text. Being a text field, we want to give it a length. The other types don't need a length added. Now the field name itself, I'm going to make it exactly the same, DH name. Now I've got to be careful not to make it the same name as a SEF field name. For example, if I was to make it device host name, that would actually cause an error because device host name is already a valid SEF field name. Once I'm happy with this, again, keeping in mind I've clicked additional data field, we'll see what happens here now. My new field is created, correct type, length, and so forth, but my actual field name now is ad.dh name, so it becomes an additional data field name. And this becomes important when we're extracting extra information out of a SEF event later on. We'll show this with an example flex connector. So once I'm happy with that, I'll save it, and then I'll restart and take myself out of maintenance mode. And again, this takes a couple of minutes, so we'll hit the restart button and come back when it's ready. Okay, now that we're back in non-maintenance mode, we can actually go back to our search indexes page and have a look now at the indexable fields. We saw before, these are the fields that are not currently indexed by Logger. But now that we're back into production mode, scroll down here, you'll see DH name. So DH name is now a field that can be indexed if we want it to be. And so what we do here is click on the name and then hit apply changes. The system will ask if we're happy with the DH name. Press OK, and that is now saved to the index for use within searching and reporting. So any field value information that comes from an event and is destined for DH name field will be indexed as part of the standard Logger indexing. So it'll be very fast. Now that we've created this indexed field, we're now going to take advantage of it in Logger itself. So now we're going to turn our attention to actually receiving events from a flex connector and a device, and then populating that field with the relevant information. All right, so now we're going to take a look at how we actually take advantage of that new indexable field. So firstly, I've created a new receiver called Lenovo Firewall. I've done this deliberately just to keep the events separated from everything else so it's easy for us to follow. So if I click on this receiver from the summary page, I can be immediately taken down into a view of events from the last 2 hours for this particular device. And you'll notice that it's obviously very familiar in terms of being a firewall type device, source address, destination address, ports and so forth, bytes in, bytes out. So this is a firewall that we've grabbed information from a custom firewall log, and of course written our own flex connector for. So you'll notice that there's a bunch of different fields here. I've created my own field set, but of course when any event comes into Logger, it's full of other information, other events, other event fields that may or may not be useful to us. So my selected field set here for this particular device are only these fields. So let's take a look at what else is actually coming through in the event. So what I can do here is go to the Customize Fields section, click on Special, and I can click on the asterisks and then include the asterisks in my field set. What that does is that captures any and all fields that might be coming through with the SEF event, whether they're derived, whether they're part of the event itself, etc., etc. So let's click on OK there, and suddenly our view becomes a lot more in terms of the number of fields. You'll see of categorization and so forth, a whole bunch of other fields that may or may not make sense to you. So we scroll right over to the right here, and we start seeing some other interesting field names that, yes, we would be familiar with if we were familiar with the SEF schema. source zone URI, start time, agent severity, and so forth. Again, these are colored, so they are indexable if they are not already indexed, and that makes it easy and fast for us to find what we're looking for. But what you may notice here is a whole bunch of new field names that have suddenly appeared that do not have a color, which also pertain to the fact that they're not indexable. These are actually SEF fields. AMAC is a SEF field name for agent MAC address. It's a valid SEF field, but it's not a SEF field that's typically part of the logger schema, hence it's been excluded, so to speak. And the problem, one of the caveats with logger and how SEF and logger work together is that this field will become viewable. So it's a discernible column within the view, but it's not actually searchable as a field itself. We can do a straight text search on this MAC address. I can double click on that, and you'll notice my search has been updated. And of course, I actually get back results because I'm searching for this MAC address string throughout the entire event. But if I was to say AMAC equals this particular MAC address, look what happens next. There's a problem. We've got an error message saying agent MAC address is not a field that can be searched on. So logger is aware that AMAC is a valid SEF field, but it's not actually part of its schema. So it's not searchable at this time. So that makes it rather interesting. So if we're in a situation where we wanted to have custom information come into our event schema or our database, it sort of makes it so we need to do a little bit of extra work to bring that information in easily. So I'll just remove that from our search phrase, go back to something that was actually working. And this is where the notion of additional data comes into play, and what we were talking about before and when we created that new indexable field. And so in order to give you a more in-depth look at how that actually works and how we can take advantage of it, let's take a look at a log file, and let's also take a look at an actual Flex connector that we've created to take advantage of that field. So we bring this box up here, text editor with my Flex agent regex. And if you've built a Flex connector before, you're probably familiar with this. As we read in the text file or the log file, the Smart connector or the Flex connector is actually parsing each line with this regex that we've predefined, and then basically tokenizing the fields for us with a name and then a type as well. So we know whether it's a long or a MAC address or an IP address and so forth. And then further down, once we've tokenized it, we actually then assign the tokens themselves to real SEF field names. So event.endTime, for example, is being mapped from the token that we derived called date. The destination address is the SEF event field destination address is derived from DIP or destination IP, which is of course an actual token up here, token number 9 to be exact, within our regexed log file line. So what's interesting here is that we're not necessarily mapping all of these tokens to an actual SEF field. And you may have noticed up the top here, I've actually got an additional parameter for my configuration file called additional data.enabled equals true. But of course, that's commented out right now. And let's take, for example, the token dname. Now with dname is tokenized, but it's not actually assigned any SEF field value. So in other words, I haven't assigned the token dname to custom string 1 or anything like that. It's basically being parsed, but it's not being utilized in any way, shape, or form. And you'll also notice down here a little lower that I am now taking that dname token and I'm assigning it to our additional data field DHName, which of course we created earlier in the demonstration, that new indexable field. So what we're saying here is I'd like to take that dname token and actually assign it to my additional data indexed field called DHName. But of course, this is commented out right now, and I've deliberately commented it out so we see the difference in what actually occurs within Logger. So what we'll do here is we'll uncomment additional data.enabled, so we will enable additional data. We'll save that. And what I'll do now is I'll rerun the Flex connector and push some new events into the system so we can actually see what effect additional data.enabled equals true has on our Logger search. So just to give you a recap, we've just enabled this additional data. But remember, we've got all the fields showing here, but you will not see a field called dname. Even though dname has been tokenized within the Flex connector, it's not being parsed to the actual, through to Logger as part of the event. But when we come to actually enable additional data in the Flex connector configuration file, we're going to start to see dname come through as part of the event. So we're just waiting for some new events to come through which will show us exactly that. So right now, again, you'll not see a dname field. There's a lot of different SEF fields and so forth in the actual event itself, but nothing called dname. So I've waited a couple of seconds. I'm going to do a new search against that new configuration. Scroll across here as we've done before. And what you'll see now is all these AD dot field names. Now we've never mapped them to any SEF field, but they're now coming through as additional data. So you'll remember from our actual configuration here, we have tokens such as dev ID and dname. They're not actually being mapped to any SEF field down in this section within our Flex connector. So we're basically seeing additional information being sent through to us. But of course, like our other non-searchable fields like AMAC that we saw before, this is also not really searchable and reportable upon because it's not real. It's not a field within the Logger schema itself or the database. So again, we can see the information, but we can't actually do any real field-based searching on that information. What we want to do now is actually map that information to a real field so we can take advantage of it and index it. So let's do that now. So firstly, you'll remember that I've enabled additional data. So we will get other fields, other additional fields coming through. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say additional data.dhname, which is, remember, is my new indexable field name, is going to be mapped to that dname token. I'm going to save that new Flex connector configuration, and then I'm going to send some more events into Logger and see what difference that makes for our search output. Right, so we've given it a couple of minutes for new events to come in, and what I'll do is I'll hit go again on a new search, and remember we've now enabled this particular mapping to occur to my new field from the dname token through to my new dhname indexable field. I run a new search with some new events that have popped through using that new configuration, and when we scroll across now, we'll see something slightly different. We'll now see this dhname field, and if we mouse over it, it says it's indexed, and we're filling out those field values quite nicely. What's nice is, and what you'll notice is that it's not actually prefixed with AD anymore. It's because it's been mapped to a real field within my Logger schema that we now drop that AD.prefix and it's now dhname. So this field is indexed, it is searchable and reportable, whereas our other fields with AD dot aren't necessarily so. On the notion of custom fields being derived from SEF fields, within ArcSight Logger 6.5 and above, we have the ability now to allow you to quickly and easily map SEF fields to custom fields. And so this can save a lot of time in mapping. So you'll remember from our previous example, we created our very own custom field name called DH name, and that worked very, very well for us. But what if we want to bring in real SEF fields that aren't part of the logger schema? And this is exactly what this feature allows us to do. And so quite simply, if we want to include a SEF field that's not part of the logger schema, we can simply come across here, click on display name, and start to build out any of the actual SEF field name. And as you can see, Logger is automatically giving me options as to SEF fields that aren't part of the logger schema. So it makes it extremely easy for me to start mapping these important fields. So source DNS domain, I choose it. And what's really great about this feature is it automatically populates the correct type, text in this case, gives it the correct length, so in other words, what it expects it to be at a maximum, and then gives it the actual field name as well. So I can OK that. And I can keep doing this for as many as I like. So agent, time zone, agent, MAC address. And again, you'll see that the field name is populated with the abbreviated actual SEF field name, which you may have noticed in the previous example while we're in the search GUI of Logger. And at the same time, again, it's selected the correct type for us as well. So again, we have immediately added these two SEF fields very quickly and easily. I'm going to save those, and then of course we can go back just like we did with other custom fields and actually make them indexable as well so that we can use them very quickly in searching as well as reporting. Lastly, for this demonstration and tutorial, we wanted to show you how you can take advantage of that newly indexed field in Logger reporting. So just like any other field that's part of the Logger schema, we can now use it in our query objects and hence our reports. So I'll give you a very quick demonstration of that just to prove the point. I've got a demonstration query here. So rather than going through the whole process of creating the query object, I'll just give you a quick look at the actual SQL that I've used. So we'll go over to table, events. If you're familiar with Logger reporting, you'll know that when I design my actual query object, it's straight SQL, so it should be straightforward for people who are familiar with SQL. But at the same time, you'll notice in my SQL statement here, I can actually reference the DH name field directly. So if I take a look at the database schema here in SQL, you may well be familiar with the fact that all event fields start with arc underscore. So all of these field names are essentially SEF field names as well. And what's really nice here is that our newly created field, indexable field, DH name is also here. Of course, we originally attributed it as an additional data field, so it would be populated from additional data. But it's now an indexed field within the Logger schema, and as you can see, I can utilize it within my reports. So here I've got an extremely simple query that simply pulls a few of the SEF field names as well as the DH name field. It doesn't have a prefix of arc underscore because it's not part of the core SEF schema, but that's okay. And I've simply said from events, which is the events database, where events.dh name is not null. So I'm simply, for the sake of an example, I'm simply removing that those null values. So when I come to actually generate a report, I could actually utilize this demo query. I'll just quickly search for it. There it is there. Double click on it. I'll leave everything as default for my parameters because I really just want to demonstrate the result set and the use of that field. I'll put through the request and within a few seconds I'll see results there for my report. And as you can see, my new report has the vendor, leadsec, the product, leadsec firewall, as you'll remember from the actual Flex connector itself, the count, and the DH name. And I've done a group by, so you'll see here that themis.mfe.lab is the D name that I've used within all of the events in the Flex connector. So this is a great example of where we can now take advantage of that newly indexed field within Logger and having expanded that SEF schema to better suit what I might like to do as a customer. Thank you for watching.